Welcome to the YouMeVerse podcast. We're your hosts, Jeffrey and Odette. Together we have thousands of hours of yoga and meditation experience.
Here, you get to be butterflies on the wall and listen in on our joyous spiritual conversations about how these practices have and continue to transform us. Thank you for joining. All right.
And we're off.
Okay, so episode 2 of the official YouMeVerse podcast, which we did not clearly define last time, but we have landed on that. And I love it. We wanted it. We couldn't find the URL, but it doesn't matter because we got a better one anyways. So
yes,
here we go.
Yes.
So last time we got to 45 minutes and I really loved where it went. I enjoyed it so much. We talked a bit about what we would discuss this time around. However, there's been a lot of time since then. So I was thinking yesterday, actually, if maybe you had some thoughts, and you did kind of mention this earlier today about where we could take this. Is it a continuation of where we were last time, or do we start somewhere completely different? How do you feel?
Well, I think anything would work. But what we were talking about today dovetailed on how we ended last time, which was talking about states. We were talking about our state of being and where we're coming from. And I just say that we go with where the energy is now. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Specifically, we were talking about, I guess I could say processing experiences, and you use the word shifting a lot, which I like. And, experiencing something and not being stuck there, and processing, which is the word I use, and shifting, which is the word you use, right, to move through it or around it.
I love that.
And yes, that's what I say we do.
Yeah. And that is relevant to your and my experience and everyone's experience really all the time. And it, to me, is also an indication of how much we are evolving or allowing ourselves to evolve into what we are asking for. Everyone has a process in which they do that. How aware are people is really what I talk about. Is there a practice to do that where you don't have to be behind keeping up with your evolution, perhaps even creating it before the fact. And so therefore you're aligned with it. So that to me maybe are the two ways in which I would like to start the conversation about it. And this goes back into a practice like yoga or meditation, or really anything that people do to be centered is what some people use. So maybe I could ask you, because you talk about a process, and you and I have talked a lot about processes internally of each of us. And I love to hear the things that you share about that. So maybe start there. What are some of your processes? What are the details of that?
Yes. So I guess what we're really talking about is your state of being, right? Like the person that you are right now. And at least for me, I feel like I've been a certain person for certain segments of my life. And it's like, how do you change from the person you are to someone different? And for me, I feel like it's really been my mindset and the way I choose to see things. And there was a long period where I was like the same person. I was like the same person for a really long time, and I saw things the same way, and my thought processes were, pretty much the same, just rehashing of the same thoughts, same beliefs, same routines. And really, times where I have changed the person that I am happened because I became more aware of my thoughts. I became more aware of things I was feeling and didn't push them aside. I actually sat with them, questioned them. And like you just said, yoga and meditation are very helpful tools for beginning that process. Mm-hmm. So for example, in yoga, when you learn yoga physical practices, a lot of the times we're taught the idea that your emotions and experiences are somewhat physical and stored in your physical body.
Yes.
Right? Like you have emotions and certain hormones and proteins are released and have an actual effect on your body. And being able to notice those sensations and not create like this big story around them and be able to process and release them fully is a part of that. So for me, in that long period where I was the same person, it's not like I didn't like the person I was. I just wasn't changing. And there were definitely physical manifestations of stress or things I wasn't really paying attention to or didn't know how to recognize. Right. That really only shifted when I took the time to stop and really feel into my physical body.
Right.
And you kind of can't get around that with the yoga postures. And just some of them are very comfortable and you're like, oh, this is discomfort. That's interesting. And then you learn how you respond to something that's not comfortable, right, for example. And then the other part of it I'll go to is the thought patterns. So I was thinking the same way for that period of time, basically. Like I had the same worldview. The relationships I had were the same. The way I saw people was the same. And during my meditation practice is really where I started looking at that. I was like, wow, that's a thought. And that's not a thought that I love. And being able to step back from it and look at it and be like, oh, my thoughts aren't really parts of me. I can choose the thoughts that I want. I can choose the way I see this person or this outcome. That's like a huge deal. That's like a huge thing. Right. Because if you can change one thought about the way you see yourself, for example, like you're going to change the person that you are. Yeah. And so that's kind of in a long-winded way of my process is really, I just sit with my body when anything comes up as best as I can and let it move through me. And then as best as I can, I evaluate my thoughts. I really watch them. I ask myself if I want to keep them. All of my beliefs, same thing. Right. And now I'm becoming a new person like all the time. There's this rapid, if I can call it evolution. There's not ever going to be that long period for me anymore where I'm the same person for years, you know? Yes, yes. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about what I just said.
Yeah, I love all of that so much because, and this is what's interesting in our dynamic is that you did have you've had a lot of education in a lot of ways, but in particular yoga and meditation. And yes, I mentioned that I went through a teacher training, but I also mentioned that I gave little attention to things that just didn't interest me about it. And it was primarily just conversations as it pertained to things that we were reading, which weren't necessarily educational in particular to say physical yoga, but it was more of just concepts. But the main point of all that is that everything I experienced was just through my personal experience with self, and it overlaps everything that you're saying. And so for me, this also stemmed from because of this kind of multitudinous situation of injuries that I had. And I couldn't just do certain poses because I physically couldn't do them. So I had to find a way to heal these things in some way. So for me, it was, once again, going back and being with self and just anchoring in breath and allowing my body to move me naturally. And in doing that, it lends to what you were talking about. And that is, I was healing aspects of my physicality that then would translate into thoughts that were being released from me. And I could very clearly see how this was happening because I would hold poses, and I've talked about this, for 30 minutes at a time, maybe even an hour. I would get into a place, and from the outside, if someone was observing me, it wouldn't really look like I was moving, but I was internally. And this is what eventually got into my meditation and, lotus and traditional sitting position. But the same kind of thing, the movements were so subtle within me that nobody would actually notice that I was doing anything. And that's what really allowed me to harness the focus that I have now, because I would do that for hours at a time. And it wouldn't necessarily, like I said, be in lotus. I might be in some kind of variation of a split or whatever it might be, but I felt my body was moving me in that direction. So the point is that it is very much true that even if an injury occurs from something in an incident or something that we hold on to for months and years at a time, it's all the same. It's all an attraction from some kind of resistance that we have, and therefore it is stored in the physical body. So that's why yoga is so powerful, and just as a tool to release those things from our body. Not saying that you have to do that, but in my experience, there is no better way to release those physical traumas or illnesses or diseases. And so I had this extremely potent experience with that. And so I know for certain that that is an absolute truth from my own knowingness. And I healed things, as I talked about in the first one, that people were saying were impossible. So, and that's not just because of it, like I said, an injury from an incident. That's because sometimes people harness these thoughts that do not serve them and hold on to them for decades. And the same thing happens. And it becomes an imbalance in the physical body. And it will manifest in different ways, whether it be an injury over time or a nagging knee or hip or whatever, or even posture imbalances, all kinds of things. And that's why if people just learn how to be with themselves physically in that way, like you were talking about, they don't have to even do particular poses. They will learn how to transmute those things and heal those things. And then that lends to, just pure meditation. It's very similar because, once I reach this place where, because really it's all the same. Meditation, yoga, you're just moving a little more. You're in the physical body a little more when it's, more, say, physically focused. But if I'm really wanting to change something or shift something, I don't have to be in a position. I don't have to be doing a certain pose.
Oh, for sure.
But those things helps to get to that level of focus. So if I was to tell somebody right now, oh yeah, just go and meditate for an hour and you can change your life in an hour. If they've never done any of those things, of course they're not going to be able to do that. But there is that possibility. There is a path to that possibility as well, though. So once I got to those places where I was holding poses for hours and hours and hours, it was very easy to then just translate that into sitting and doing the same with my mind. And like you were saying, then it was this observation. And so there was a long period of observation. What are these thoughts that are arising? What am I thinking about? Why am I thinking this? And then as I slowly started to shift those things, I would witness the things around me changing. Not just because my perception was changing, but because I was actually attracting from a different place of being.
Right.
Everyone has the same realization through these techniques or tools, but it's a different path. But it's similar. Mm-hmm. It's similar in that these are kind of universal ways in which reality works.
Yeah, we all have, fundamentally the same human, like a shared human experience. Mm-hmm. And it's not like, I don't feel like you and I are saying like we became like better people. Like I don't think I was like a worse person before.
Yeah.
I wanted to arrange my mind slightly differently when I realized I could and I had a choice, and I just became a different version of me.
Yes.
And I know that whoever someone is, like there may be something they want to attain or achieve, and it might just be a matter of changing the way that they think, like about themselves or their own abilities. And what you just shared had me thinking about, well, what is really the difference between like a yoga practice or yoga and meditation practice versus going to the gym or being involved in another physical sport? I know that people who love to run or athletes who really get in their zone, to them, something like running or being at the gym doing what they do or practicing could be like a meditation for them.
Yes.
And they're in their body. And I can't really speak to that because I'm not into many different sports like that. I mean, recreationally, yes. And I know you have been very active, and I'd like your thoughts about this. But I would say, with my experience, that really what makes yoga somewhat different is that there's this, not necessarily, but usually there's this emphasis on feeling inside of your body. Unless the teacher's really focused on what the pose looks like, which I feel like is definitely the case in a lot of other sports or like gymnastics or ballet, like you need to hit the form, right? And it's like, even if your feet hurt, you keep going. Yeah. But in a lot of yoga classes and with yoga teachers, that's not the way that it is overall. It's like, well, if this hurts, don't do it.
Yeah.
If you can't do this, that's okay. Like, how does your body feel? For me, that's something that's fairly different and starts that process of like, oh, I do feel something inside here. What is that? Instead of ignoring it.
Yes. Although there are some people that do have the goal as the pose,
Oh, for sure. Yes. That's why I said in general.
Yeah, in general. Yeah. In general, that is where people, at least people that understand where they're trying to take their students. And I did kind of mention this a little bit before, but I love going deeper into this, is that from my adolescence, I was playing sports from as early as I can recall. And for me, that was my first way of understanding myself in some ways, because even when I started to have things occur to me when I was younger that I had to deal with in a physical way, that was always something that I would come back to that felt familiar. It felt like what I was supposed to be doing. So it was definitely a connection with myself. And I kind of want to say this quickly as kind of a preface to this. There's different paths. And even if someone plays a sport their entire life and that's how they connect with self and they never reach deeper levels of awareness of self, there's nothing wrong with that. There's different levels of consciousness, and it's all about fun and joy and happiness at the core of it, no matter what. And so if people are doing that, great. But if they also find themselves hearing stuff or content like this, there's a reason. It's because they're asking for more. Because I've had a lot of people come to me and they say, well, I do this and this. And I'm like, well, keep doing that if that's what feels great. But here's something a little more if you're interested. And if the interest isn't there strong enough and they don't pursue it, it's because they're not ready for it, or maybe never, So I just wanted to make sure that is clear. There is nothing wrong, like I said last time, with anything that anyone does to feel that connection with self. But I can remark, because of my experiences, that I was always active. I was always playing sports. I was always excelling at everything that I did. There was this desire within me to be the best always, not because I wanted to beat other people, but because I always wanted to be better than I was the day before. That was always my driving force. And when I found myself coming up with people that were very competitive, it would turn me off and I wouldn't want to be a part of it. Even later on, when I started to play professional esports that wasn't physical, people would want to compete with me for money. And I didn't.
Yes.
And I didn't want to, because it wasn't fun. The whole point was that I like to challenge myself to be a little better or improve.
Well, can I comment on that? Can I insert something in there?
Absolutely.
'Cause I remember us talking about that. And I feel like I remember you saying that you had noticed that people who were very competitive and played just to win, they wouldn't win. Is that true? Am I remembering that right?
Or they would, because they would create an environment around them so strong. The momentum of that environment would move them to potentially win, because it wasn't just them. It was the people, the group that would fuel this expectation. But if they were taken out of that environment, they would not win. So they had to be in that environment for them to succeed in that way. It's kind of like when you have someone in any sport professionally, they're amazing what they do, but there's also this expectation that they're amazing because they've created that expectation. But anyone can do anything great at any given time. It doesn't have to require that much time and effort. And I know this from my experience, because there would be times where I would do something new, and then within a short period of time, people were like, how are you so good at this? It's because I just expected myself to be that way. Not because I had been great at whatever that particular thing was, but because I had been at other things. And somehow within me, I just knew that I could with anything.
Right. So for you, that's part of your self-concept. That's if I could say it this way, that's a belief you have that you can learn anything and become great at it.
Yes.
And so if we take that as being a belief, anybody can
cultivate that belief.
Yeah. Anyone can. Why not? Anyone can adopt that belief. It might not feel like it's true for them, but that was a big wake up call for me when I realized things I believed. And I was like, I don't really have to believe that. And some of those beliefs were difficult for me to let go of, because I would think, well, I have all this evidence that this belief is true. Right. From the past. And sometimes I would feel justified in continuing with a belief that I honestly just didn't want to keep.
Yeah.
And it's well, it takes some courage, I guess, to start thinking differently and then be like, well, I have all this evidence that this isn't true for me, but I'm going to just look for anything today. It's
right.
To start thinking differently. like, let's take someone who thinks the opposite of you, that they're not good at things, or, like it could be pretty subconscious too, that, well, I can't do that, or they can do that, but it's because of their body type and blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they talk themselves out of it. But that's what I'm saying. It's like a part of your actual makeup right now is you have that.
But the reason is any desire is stimulated from experience. And this goes back to my early experiences as a human in this iteration. I was ill all the time and I was told all these things. I mean, we're talking as I'm still creating and understanding my own reality. And I felt like that wasn't right to this extreme degree, and to the point that I was not willing to accept it. So while most people might accept things that are being told to them at young ages, I was not. I thought this is not true. And then I showed myself over time that it wasn't true. And not only was it not true, I was capable of doing anything. And so, yes, it wasn't that it was just part of my natural makeup. I did cultivate it at some point. It was just really early on in my life. And it was pretty unconscious too. Like, meaning that I wasn't sitting there going, oh, I'm aware of my thoughts and my thoughts are creating my reality and attracting my experiences and this and that. You know what I mean? It wasn't to that degree, but it was just this knowingness that was like really the first kind of fundamental aspect of who I was that I had created. And so then from that, I would have these experiences throughout my life that were just kind of reflections of that in more extreme ways to eventually realize what I realize now. But that's why I was always telling people, as I said before, you can do that, or you can do this, you can do anything. But I wasn't aware that I had cultivated something a little bit different because of my early experiences. So, you know what I mean? So it was like I would just see people in that ability and tell them, but I wouldn't really know how to show them how to shift their thoughts or how to change what they were currently. So that's what we kind of talked about in episode 1. I didn't know how to teach people it. I just knew that it was possible,
Yes. And just being not just, but being an example of someone who was told that they were going to be sick or was going to be a certain way, and then not being that. Just, we've talked about that a lot. Teaching through just being.
Yes.
Teaching through being who you want to be. And, and not having to sit someone down and explain it step by step.
Yes. But then this podcast is part of that too, because us having these conversations, and I'm still human, you're human, we're all human, and we still are having constant expansion and evolution. And it's honing in on these processes more subtly and more effectively and more efficiently. And that's what it is for me now. It's, I'm creating this and now I'm creating this, but how can I do so with more energy, with more flow, with more ease, with more fun, with more joy? And it's always that. But while doing that, I am also then attracting others that are asking for that concurrently. So in my day-to-day life and my day-to-day experiences, I'm still sharing this stuff with people in every pretty much rendezvous that I have, but in different ways, and we all are doing that. We're all just teaching in the way that we understand. But it goes back to what the kind of premise of this whole podcast is that you can do it before it's happening. And what I mean by that is you can see things, witness things, observe things, and then go, ooh, I like that, I don't like that. And then go and sit at the lake or go fishing or whatever and kind of recalibrate and feel better and then attract better. But you can also do it beforehand. You don't have to wait till after it's manifest to then shift it. And that to me is the real power. That's where most people don't really live from. And that's kind of really what I try to get people to see. And that's what I've been doing for many years with people, to show them that. And it makes sense. It's so, if we've been living a life where we're always seeing and observing and thinking this is reality, how are we going to suddenly then go inward to realize, no, this is reality. And then that is a projection of my reality. It's just words. And even whoever hears this, even if it was 10 million people that heard this exact conversation, every single one of them is going to hear it different from their level of awareness. For me, that is really what I try to get people to see, because then even if just a quarter of the population of the planet knew that, there would be no reactionary way of being that we are. Like the news is obviously always kind of displaying what those reactionary politics, all of these things are reacting to what is.
Yes.
And so I'm not trying to change the world in just one podcast, but even one person who changes their understanding of self, they affect millions of people just by their beingness, like you and I talk about. You and I, and the conversations that I really enjoy about us is how are we most effective at just being without having to even necessarily teach in that specific way of teaching. And for me, like I was saying, even as I live my life and go about it, there's people that come to me. It's pretty apparent all day, every day in our interactions. And I speak to them from where they're at. And then they shift and then they come back to me later and like, wow, this has changed because of this. I still get messages from people I just talked to for like a day, 6 months later. That is the true light of consciousness. That's what I always talk about. Like that is love. That's the source of everything.
I kind of want to go back. I want some more clarity on something you said, which was creating things ahead of time.
Yeah.
So I think we should outline that a little bit more, because you and I have been talking a lot about this, but just like defining what you're talking about. So you're talking about like really using your focus and your awareness and your thoughts and all the things that are tied with that, like your moods and imagery to select what you'd like for yourself in your life.
Right.
Like, and that's, we could say ahead of time or seeing it.
Right. Ahead of it manifesting. We can use it to manifest.
And then you said, well, then go fishing or go just do whatever you do. And then just trust that you've done the work. Is that what you meant?
Yes. And what I was saying is that most people, they are just responding to life. And then they'll reach a place where they're stressed or overwhelmed, and then they got to go do something, and they go take a bath or they go fishing or they go on a trip or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with those things. Those are what we should be doing. Those are the fun, joyful things of life. That's really the reason that we're here. But it doesn't have to be because you need it.
Right. Like you got to this breaking point.
Yes.
And it's like, oh God, I need a vacation.
Yes.
I need to retreat.
Yes.
And get away.
Yes.
Okay.
Which I do want to say real quick, which is the reason that you and I we created me-treat as opposed to retreat. And I love, and you came up with that term, which I love so much. Well, it was
because retreating, we both agreed we didn't like that, because retreating is like you're running away from something. It's like you can retreat to something, but you're running from something.
Exactly.
And we would like people to have lives that they love, where they don't have to retreat from anything in it. Just go have more fun somewhere else.
Yes, exactly.
So it's like a treat for me.
Yes, I love it. That's my favorite thing. And so many people have commented on that and love it so much. But I just wanted to remark on that too. But it's about not having to get to a place where you have to do that. And you're living in this beautiful, joyous flow all the time because you've created it. But it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like if, say, somebody was listening to this and they've never done yoga or meditated. Mm-hmm. They're not going to just do yoga, meditate tonight, and then tomorrow have all of this awareness. And then, it's just moving. There is a pattern to things that you have to break a little bit. And while anything is absolutely possible, I'm not saying that couldn't happen. The likelihood is slim because of the momentum of those thoughts. So, but the point of it is, and this is really simply and concisely put, if you can stop those thoughts more consistently, that's really kind of slowing the trajectory of those thoughts. So if you do it even four times a day, you're stopping those thoughts that don't serve you, and you're allowing new thoughts to come in. And you and I talk about this aspect. I won't go into the depth of it right here, but do you have to actually be intentional with the vision of the thought, or do you need to just clear the mind enough to receive clarity of what's already around you? And this is really complex, because I could speak about this for a while. And this, to me, what it really comes down to is it's relevant where you're currently at. Meaning, if you're really in a place of despair or frustration or stress, the most important aspect is that you just quiet the mind, and you're going to have that stuff come through. But if you're in a higher place of being, then you can be very intentional and say, oh, I want to visualize a lake house, or I want to, and then start attracting from that, because you're already flowing more energy anyways in those higher states of being, because it's a higher frequency. It's literally a higher sensation, and more energy flows from that. So you can't just say, here is this process, and anyone who is listening, go and do this process, and here's what to expect, which is why you and I always talk about there is no perfect process. There's just general understandings of it. And that's what I like to do. I like to simplify while still going as complex as people desire, and having conversations about the complexity of those processes as well.
Okay. I like that. I'm thinking about what you said. I feel like I'm wanting to say, for me, if I could summarize how I have changed, is like, let's take your stress example. Like, if you're stressed and you want to quiet your mind, for me, I have found it really helpful to connect with my body somehow. Mm-hmm. And yoga practice, or just sitting and really feeling what those emotions feel like. Like, stress has a physical sensation. Like, it's not just this abstract thing. Like, you might feel your heart racing, or tension, or there's going to be physical stuff. And for me, I find it very helpful to connect with my body and let my body do whatever it needs to do to get rid of that. So if there's stress, sometimes that means I'm going to cry for like a minute or a couple minutes, and that's just my body's way of releasing that stress. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes it's more of a physical energy, and I need to go run and just like get the energy out. And then I find I have a lot more success in quieting my mind.
Right.
Like, for me, I have had to have this physical and mental aspect to be successful at what we're talking about, to like deliberately choose my thoughts. Right. And to get out of like an old way of being that's not helpful, like really connecting with my body and just letting it process. And I feel like what I just said is, I'm making it sound easy, but I was the type of person who, like, I didn't cry. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was very stoic.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't something that I did. And I was, came across as very strong. But yeah, it's just not very helpful.
Yeah.
Like, the body really wants to do these things naturally. And I really strongly believe that now, that, I mean, even now with the person that I am, who I really like, there still are days where I'm stressed over something. It doesn't have to be anything major, but sometimes my body still needs to go run, right, or do yoga, or just sit for a while and do nothing, or cry.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's some physical release for me that I find very helpful.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes back and lends back to what I'd never really fully answered earlier before about my experience, with being active and playing sports and weightlifting for 18 years and being super muscular and all types of different ways. Like, you could look back and see that I've been so many different versions, and through all that, I was doing those things because it felt right in the moment. And that was my process, whether it be playing a sport, or being in extreme sports, or weightlifting, or being bigger, or being smaller, or more, whatever it was. But then when I discovered what I do now, it's more about the getting out ahead of it than it is about responding to it, whether it be physical or mental. So I'm not saying, all you have to do is just do yoga and meditation, and that's all you have to do ever. No. But for me personally, right now, I don't need to do anything else. I do yoga every day, and I meditate every day. And I, sometimes have maybe a little bit of other desire to do something, but not really that much physically. But that's just where I'm at. So I would never say anyone should ascribe to this way of being right now, because this is what I do, and this is how amazing my experience is. There is a process in that as well. But it just goes back to me what I was saying earlier about the need to process because of something that's already happening. And one thing I'll speak about this is, when I did that year of meditation, I saw that you can shift things literally instantly But to do that literally requires like, like a clearing of the mind, like not just clearing it to sit in meditation, but I mean like a lobotomy, you know? So you can't expect to do that. I see the mind as a receiver, as a transmitter, but you are kind of running like this cache, like you're running this RAM, so to speak. And so if you're allowing that to clear out, it happens slowly at first, but then you can shift fast. That's why you say, oh, I shift so fast now, because you have created that process and those practices that work, and you can do it way faster than you have in the past. And so even now, if you go and run or do whatever, you are so in tune with yourself, you know what you need and what it's going to lend to. And then you see the evidence of it immediately, and you're cultivating it in real time or beforehand, as opposed to after the fact, because you're not having to do something that you thought you had to do. You're very much in creation mode of yourself and your environment and your experience.
And I think for me, a major a shift that happened for me to be able to do that was to drop any victim-based mindset, which it was like, it's super, what's the word? Like if you've been in a victim mindset for a long period, it feels very comfortable to be there, to like blame other people or blame this person or the society or da-da-da. Like it's very comfortable because you can just displace anything you don't like.
Yeah.
But dropping that and then accepting the premises of, okay, I believe that my mindset is reflected to me, and I believe that I can change my mindset, and then I had to think about what are the components of that. Okay, well, my beliefs and my values and my thoughts, like, and my memories, like, can I change those things? And I thought about that, and I said yes to myself. So like everything we're talking about, I don't think it would really make a difference for someone who didn't believe that their mindset had an effect on their world and that they created their world from inside. Like, I feel like people have to accept those as premises at the beginning. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, it's like you're a victim.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to like invalidate anything anyone feels.
For sure.
Like I know what that feels like. I'm sure everybody knows what that feels like. But it takes like some decision making and being like, okay, well, I'm going to create my life and let's just learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an overnight process for me, but it's really like my inner yoga now, like every day.
Yeah. And I love that you went there, because this is also what I experienced a while back. And I want to also remark, I don't think I said this last time, that when I used to do hours and hours of meditation, I would receive for myself, but I would receive like the collective patterns of human nature, I guess is the best way of putting it. And I would see it within myself, and I would see it in others. And I would see, and I'm not digressing, this is related, and I would see how we all are having a similar experience simultaneously. There's a collective consciousness that is expressing through each of us individually, even though someone might have a different experience that's 10 years apart. In the grand scheme of time, that's not that big of a difference. So what I've experienced isn't different than what you're experiencing in your unique way, meaning other people are having experiences right now where they might think that everything is just kind of random, or there's a God that bestows blessings and not, or whatever their belief is. But eventually they will come to this realization because life is moving them into that realization. And then they start to have things come to them to show them the evidence of that. And eventually it comes to fruition. This goes back to what we were talking about in the first episode, with how you were being moved in a direction, how you could see it very clearly in hindsight, even if it was 5 years later or 10 years later. But then once you reach this place in kind of real-time creation mode, you're seeing things in real time moving you where you're asking to go. You know what I mean? And that's a big difference. There's not this lag time, because it takes a period to then witness that lag time, put those things together, draw those correlations, and then finally have that realization that, ooh, I'm doing this. And then when you finally do, you're witnessing it in real time, or at worst, maybe within a day versus years. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh my gosh. I know that for sure. Well, yeah, we can get into that maybe next time, or that whole attachment thing, or needing things to be a certain way, or like just being more easeful about how life goes. My journey to being where I am now, I wouldn't say it was like sunshine and rainbows all the time,
Yeah.
like to be here, but I wouldn't give it up for anything.
Right.
Like the control I feel like I have over my own mind. And it's something I'm wanting to master more and more every day. And I want to just go back to something you were asking. You were asking, is it really necessary to be deliberate about what you're envisioning or something like that? I think you were saying, like, is it necessary to like think all of these individual thoughts, or is it enough to like choose what you want in your life ahead of time and just let it go? I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
But since I've accepted those premises for myself, like, okay, I believe my mindset affects my world and I can change my thoughts. And that means if I do feel crappy one day, or I feel down, or there's something I'm thinking about someone that's not like very lovely, even if I really feel justified in it, I will sit with myself. And I find it very helpful to be very deliberate like that. To like talk to myself and be like, okay, girl, like, I know you think this right now, but what if we thought this? Like you're choosing to believe this about this person, but what if you're not seeing it the way you could see it? I literally did that today. I sat and I was like, okay, like you're kind of doing that victim thing again. I'm like, yeah, I really do have these inner conversations, sometimes quietly or out loud,
right,
in the car. It helps me to hear myself and be like, yeah, like you're choosing to see this way, or something about myself.
For sure.
Like if I'm down about myself or something, like, girl, listen, you're thinking this, but what if you saw it this way? Yeah. What if you're wrong? What if you're wrong? Like, that's such a huge deal. So that's what I wanted to remark on that, if I understood you right, which was, I find it very helpful to be very deliberate and to have like a vision.
Yes.
Okay. So did I understand you right?
Yeah. And and this is where it gets to that kind of subtlety always. And a lot of people I've taught or worked with, they've heard me, I use the combination of subtle nuance, because it's like so at this kind of small level of awareness that is so expansive, though. It's like the further in you go, the bigger it becomes outwardly as well. And that's part of it, like with you being deliberate in, say, even a moment. And okay, well, I'm having this conversation with myself, and now I'm changing this, and then witnessing those changes. And those are just different processes, which there's millions, and then people can create their own. But the main root of that is knowing that what I am giving my attention to is going to manifest. Simple as that. So that's a premise again that you've accepted. Yes.
So it's just like you kind of starting there. Right. And so that's like the opposite of being a victim.
Yes. And I will say, I talked about that wreck that I was in. Within a year and a half of that, I don't even think it was that long. I'd already started doing yoga, and I wasn't meditating, but still similar. I would hold a pose. I would do like even a forward fold sometimes for like 30 minutes, So wait,
this is just for like, I don't think you had described that. You don't have to, but you were talking about a motorcycle wreck you had been in.
Motorcycle wreck. Yes.
Right. And then you were subsequently healing from that, if I could use that word.
Yes.
Okay.
Still healing from that. And, the woman hit me head on. I didn't do anything wrong. I was in my lane. She just veered into my lane and hit me head on. And anyone could say, wow, what a victim to that situation. And the woman didn't have insurance. She didn't live in Dallas, like all kinds of things that just made the situation, just really extreme in so many different ways. But within a year and a half of me doing yoga and practicing, I remember those early experiences that I would have in yoga, what I call now like receiving or downloads or whatever. I remember having the sensation, I did that. I created that situation. I created that environment, all of it. I did that.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
If it's okay. Why do you think you created that? Like, what, do you remember certain thoughts you had, or is it okay if I ask that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is so long ago, but,
like, why do you think you created
it was
that?
It was a feeling. I talk about feeling, and I like to distinguish that between emotion. And last time we talked a little bit about like vibration, because that's a little more tuned to it it's more specific. But back then it was just this feeling, this knowingness. It's kind of like when you have a strong intuition, like generally speaking, for most people, they like, oh, I have this intuition. And there's just this moment where you just know something. It was
like
that.
the gut feeling,
yes,
sort of.
Yes. And in that situation back then, all those years ago, it was like that. I could just feel, ooh, I did that. But I didn't know how. But I knew. I just knew. And so I started saying that to people, and they just couldn't believe that I was saying that.
Wow, yeah.
And they were upset with me even that I was saying that, like friends and family were like, what? And they were genuinely upset with me. But it didn't bother me. I just was like, I know this. And then sure enough, all these subsequent years, I started to continue to go deeper and learn more. And then as I eventually kind of went out to listen to other spiritual teachers, I started hearing them say the same thing and realized everyone's saying the same thing, but you can't hear it until you're ready to hear it. So even if I would have listened to those people, say a decade ago, I wouldn't have heard that.
Right.
Even though that's what I know now.
I'm laughing because they would tell us that in teacher training, in yoga teacher training too. Like, don't worry about saying the same cues a lot, because you can say a cue, like teach a pose 100 times, but especially a beginner student is hearing everything all at once, and they can't like hear everything at once. Mm-hmm. So it might take them a while to hear everything you're saying. And I even had students come up to me and be like, you know what? I've been taking this class forever, and I just heard you say that in that pose. Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's totally right. Like, yeah especially if a lot of what we're talking about, it's like a lot. And what fits and what will fit in right now will stick. Yeah.
Well, and that goes to what I've talked to you about before. I've worked with people for years in different ways, whether it be yoga or meditation or just spiritual teaching or coaching or whatever you want to call it. And I'll record messages for people because they'll send me something and then I'll record them messages back, and they might be 30 minutes. It all depends, like energetically, what I'm receiving from them. And they'll listen, and then they'll listen to it a month later and they're like, I just heard this message. You said so much more. And it's like they literally think that I sent them a different message. It's the same message a month later. They are different, and they are hearing from a different place of awareness.
My God. People, I've heard jokes before. Like I watch a whole bunch of people on YouTube and over time, and I've heard different jokes and I thought I got them. Mm-hmm. And I'm not kidding. Like even years later, this joke will come back into my head and I'll actually understand it the way they meant it. I'm like, oh my God, I really didn't get that until just now.
Yeah. It's kind of like watching an animated movie, like a Pixar movie, when you were younger, and then watching it later when you're older. And then you see these like adult humorish aspects of it. And you're like, I never noticed that. It's the same kind of thing, regardless of your age. It's just consciousness. It's just conscious awareness. And there is no end to it, which is why when I was teaching even a year and a half ago to people, I would teach people at this really high kind of esoteric level that most people would listen to and think, what are you talking about?
For sure.
But those people were asking in that way.
I mean, it reminds me of like, I read the Bible last year just to edify myself more. And the whole Revelation thing, the chapter Revelation is completely like a trip. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like teaching like that. There's different books written in different ways. Some are like poetry, some are like storytelling. Yeah. Some is like historical recounts, some are like that. So there's all these different ways of conveying information. And I totally get what you're saying. Like you have to be in a certain state to understand what the heck they were saying, like, and you can't take it at this literal level.
Right.
I'd like to ask you about that next time too, I think, is you receiving, because I think for a lot of people, myself included, that could be kind of abstract. Like I'd like you next time to talk about what you mean when you say, well, I received this from them. Yeah. Like how you could actually describe that a little bit more. I think that would be really interesting.
Absolutely.
Because I'm not sure I have that same experience.
Well, you do. You're just not aware of it. You're not tuned to that level of subtlety, perhaps, because we all do. We're all doing that all the time.
Yes, I think I want you to, if you could describe it though more in different ways next time, because then I think I would understand more what you mean in your experience. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like you said, I create meditations this long or this long, depending on what I'm receiving. Mm-hmm. Yeah. From them. I also wanted to say that I feel like you being in a wreck like that and then choosing to see it the way you did, like I created that I do understand how a lot of people would be like, wow, it's almost like he's saying he deserved it. But I know that's not what you're saying. Yeah. And it takes, I think, a lot of like mental fortitude to be able to do that, because it's so easy to be like, well, to just feel sorry for yourself, really. And I would understand if you had done that. I would completely understand.
For sure. But I would have stayed there my whole life too.
Yeah. And I think there's so much more empowerment in what you decided to do. And I think it's interesting how we both are sort of here after our journeys, and not just yoga or meditation. This is like one possible outcome, like us being this way, where we're like, okay, we want to take more control of how we focus, really, and what we're deciding to believe, and then, create more ease. But yeah, I just wanted to say that because I feel like for a lot of people who are listening and have had, I would say, traumatic experiences, like that sounded like it was traumatic.
Right.
Having a traumatic experience. Yeah. But then like choosing to see it a certain way and creating some doing like some mental alchemy on it.
Yes.
And not like condemning someone or you or like hating people. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which would make a lot of sense.
So let me just speak a little bit on that.
For sure. Please.
And it goes back to what I was saying. If I didn't have those experiences when I was younger, when I was told you're going to be sick and that you're basically a sick person, is essentially what I was being told by doctors, when I'm 8 years old. Like, you're a sick person. It's like you're sick, so you need medicine. You know what I mean? Like that. I'm really kind of oversimplifying it and making it humorous, but
I understand.
But that then within me was like, no, I'm not. And here's what I really am. And then here's what I'm actually doing. And I like blossomed, So if it wasn't for that experience, then sure, I would have probably maintained this victim mentality if I just only had that wreck experience.
But I almost wonder if like that's a certain, like you have like this fortitude. I called it stubbornness last time, but like this, like, I wonder if there are other mindsets that would have submitted more to that. Like, okay, I guess I am a sick person, or just accepting.
Here's what I've discovered in meditation too. Like I won't talk about how I receive, because that's for another time.
Yes, please. Yes.
But if I practice for hours, I receive so much, and it's a sensation and it's visuals. So then I translate them into words over time, and then I will find myself naturally having interactions with people that are asking for that information, as if I'm receiving information essentially that now I'm going to convey to others that are asking that I haven't even met yet. That's how it would happen. So that's a simple version. We can talk about it more in depth next time. But during that time too, for that year, I was starting to see how we all have these trajectories when we come in that we're going to experience to awaken ourselves to, that then we use to awaken others to as well. That we are not just coming in randomly. There is some intention before we're here. And then when we're here, we live out that intention and we choose it. We're still in control of our reality. We're still choosing it and molding it as we're here. But then once we have those experiences, we realize them after the fact. And then we become that version that we were intending to be. And we create from that knowingness. And then all this makes so much sense after the fact. So if I didn't have that happen to me when I was a kid, I wouldn't have had that fortitude to then do the same thing again in a bigger way. That I met so many people that had family members or friends, because I was on a TV show after that. I was on a TV show within 6 months of that happening. And I was told that I wasn't going to be walking. And I had this TV show contact me. They're like, hey, we saw, because I was going to be on Survivor. And so I knew some producers. I was going to be on some different shows. And so I knew some producers from LA, and they had seen my situation, but they didn't know I was in a wheelchair. They didn't know the extreme of it. I didn't really post all the details about it. And it took me 3 months to get out of, the hospital basically, and some other things, but I had them contact me. And this is when it shifted, before I even was aware that I created it. Okay, so here's the truth. I've not really shared this much with many people, but there was a period where I was a victim for sure. If there's a recording of me when I was in the ER or the ICU, my older brother was there and my parents were out of town. They were in like Utah, I think. And my brother shows up, my older brother, and I'm in the ICU. I can't even open my eyes because my whole face is swollen. I'm, broken literally from like head to toe. I wasn't even sure if I was going to live, but I said, will you record me? And he said, why? I said, just record me. And so he starts recording me, and I don't even remember. This is just like me purely translating my soul in that moment. And I was like, I'm going to be a better person for this. I'm going to be better at this. I'm going to be this and this. I was just literally like coaching myself in that moment. And if I didn't do that, I don't even think I would have survived. But that was like this initial impulse for me. As soon as I was conscious, like we're talking like, 2 hours after the event. And here's a thing even right before that, rewinding. I wasn't conscious until they got me into the ER room, and they started cutting all my clothes off, screwing different things into my legs, like stapling the back of my head, like all kinds of stuff. And I'm in there with like 10 ER doctors making jokes, because that's who I naturally was always when I was younger. I was just the like uplifting, funny person. And I'm in there like bleeding out, dying, and I'm making jokes, like trying to keep the mood light. And I'm like dead. You know what I mean? And I've not told that story to many people because the story doesn't really matter. But that was my core innate being, to know these things and to uplift others around me. So then, like I said, a few hours later, I'm in the ICU. I'm at least stable. Then I start coaching myself, like telling myself, you're going to be this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. Then I had all these complications for like a month, and they had to keep doing this operation and this. And it was just, and I kept having to convince myself. And people might come in there, and I would see them look at me, and I could see their look, like they thought I was dying. Like I could see it. And that's why I told people not to come see me. I wouldn't let people come and see me. I mean, I had a girlfriend at the time. I wouldn't let her come and see me. My family members, I said, do not come and see me, because it was harder for me to watch their reaction than it was for me just to do what I knew I needed to do in the moment. And so then and that to me was really when I learned who I was. And then it was not even probably 3 months later, I was just about to get out of a wheelchair, and I was still struggling a little bit because I was moving so slowly, meaning as far as like what I thought I could do to recover, and whether I was going to be able to walk and all these other things. And there was this one night, and I was sitting in my room. I had to stay with my parents because I had to be under constant supervision. And I was sitting in my room in a wheelchair, and I was like, this is what, I don't understand anything, but tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be the happiest person I have ever met forever. And I went to sleep, and I woke up, and it was like I woke up into a new reality. From that moment, for the next 30 days, every single day was like magic. I couldn't even describe the things that were happening. People reaching out to me, people wanted me to be on this show, and then this girl wanted to hang out. From 3 months of this extreme like depth of darkness to within 12 hours, a dream. And that's when I really realized I'm doing this. But it wasn't until I started doing yoga 9 months later or so that I started to connect spiritually in these deeper ways and understanding how all of this really works. So it was still, up until that point, all these extreme things happening in my life, and I was creating amazing, and then I wasn't, then I was creating amazing, and I wasn't, and people would witness it, and people were attracted to me, and all kinds of people come to me. But then finally, when that happened, that's what really started the inward journey to my true self that I knew then I was supposed to share with other people. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade. So that's why I could never be a victim. If I would have even stayed in as a victim mindset, I wouldn't have survived. I literally would not have survived. I couldn't have. My body would not have survived. It's literally that. And I could speak way more, but I know if I go further of that, it's gonna be a while.
Wow, I haven't heard all of that, but that's just an incredible, like, not story, because that really happened to you, like experience. And like, to look at you now, like you would never know. Like you do more like yoga stuff than I do. Like, you're bendier than I am.
In some ways, not always.
But yeah, I think that is not only inspiring, but just shows like what your spirit can do. Like if you have this strong spirit, even not just the mindset, but like a spirit that just keeps going, like, and that decision, like, I am going to be this, I'm going to feel this. That to me is just so compelling.
That's why I knew I was supposed to share with others, because I was always doing that my whole life. I just didn't know how to help people do it. But then, as I said, I then cultivated ways, and then that's what I started doing. And now I love to do it with other people. That's why I've taught for so long, because I can see people and help people move within 30 days, ways that they've never moved or shifted in such quick, rapid succession. And there's nothing more rewarding than that. And for you, and where our overlap is, and all these conversations we've had since we've met, and all the people I've interacted with, you have this kind of diversity that is similar to mine, even though our past experiences are, not entirely the same. But it allows me to have these conversations that are so robust. And I talked about that before. And it's so rewarding to me, because most people are just coming to me because they want answers. And with our interactions, and like I was talking about last time, it's more conversational. And this isn't how I talk when I talk with people that I'm teaching. It's like, here's my problem, and then I translate their solution. So it's just me kind of being this conduit for them.
Wow. Can I ask something? It would be so interesting if one day we had like a caller and people could listen to what you do and what you mean. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we can talk about that later, but that would be really very fascinating to understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. I would love to do that, actually.
Okay. I'm going to write that down as an idea.
The difference is too, in those situations, those people are coming with that expectation, and I am having that expectation. If people understood that everything that we receive is from our actual expectation, and when we're talking about all these things, whether it be being deliberate with our thought or intentional with just our next phase of life or even our day or whatever, it's really just setting an expectation. And it's creating an actual expectation. Because if you have a true, unencumbered expectation, it's going to occur. And so that's why when I have those interactions with people in that way, I'm expecting them to be that way. They're expecting me to be that way. And it's easy to flow that way. And that kind of lends to what you were asking earlier, and what we can talk about next time, about how we tune into those subtle states where you can feel things and the expectation of others. And eventually we could talk about things so deep and so kind of like esoteric that it is still relatable, but there are these states of being that are so interesting that I have experienced and, in my past, that's not really relatable to the average person, but there's so much more possible. That's why I always at least mention that there's so much more possible than most people realize. It's creating these places. And that's why for you and I, and these places that we've talked about creating as far as a sanctuary or certain, like a retreat area or whatever, if you create that space, people are going to have that experience. And so that's, to me, the most beautiful aspect of really what I know now, is that you can know something so strongly and create it with such expectation that it's going to be. And it doesn't matter what is actually happening around anyone at any given time. If you can cultivate that within, you're going to create it. And to know that power in self is really what we're all looking for. And that's really the journey. Because if you're doing that, you're creating that for others that are asking too. If we were all doing that, no one would be a victim, because we'd be creating in such powerful ways that everyone would be witnessing, what we're creating and want to be a part of it and want to learn how to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make sense. Yes. Yes. And earlier I was asking whether you thought there were, I know there are different kinds of mindsets. And I use the word weaker, but sometimes you'll say things and I can tell, like, certain people who might come across the podcast who aren't quite there. Right. And that could be like come up against the ego, even though I don't think the ego is bad. That's why I sometimes to just soothe that a little bit, because I know for me, I was able to hear a lot more when my ego wasn't threatened in any way. And like saying that, some of the things we say, I know that they sound really not controversial, but they're big things, like not being a victim. Things happen to you for a reason, even things that might seem really hard. Like at first, I know that my ego is like, well, that's terrible, but that's just why I like to go back to what we say and explain a little bit more about what we are actually meaning and not invalidate anything anyone's going through. Of course. Just because it's not like we're not saying that pain isn't real and the suffering, but ways out of that is really what we've been talking about.
And that's the empowering aspect. And that's the difference. And there's two kind of components to that. When you know that it's serving you, to have a deeper realization of what you really want and how to create what you want and how to achieve what you want, and that nothing is coincidental, then you're coming into a power, and anything that you experienced up until that moment doesn't matter. You're like, oh, that all served me. Thank you. Then you reach true appreciation all the time, because you realized everything served me for this moment that I now know what I know. And also concurrently, if there's anyone that's hearing anything that I say or you say anywhere, they're hearing it from their place that they're asking. Nothing is ever being asserted into anyone's experience. And so even if somebody was to hear this and like, oh, that's silly, or that's not true, or I'm a victim, and they can't understand and see beyond that, they are still shifted from hearing it at their lower level of awareness.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Like, and then they're going to start to see evidence of it over time.
Oh, yeah. It's part of your diet, like everything you read and hear and the shows you watch and the news and all that. Totally.
Yeah.
I think it's just part of my natural way of being. And also my training as a therapist as a yoga therapist is creating a safe space. And for my own experiences, I know I was able to hear things more when at least where I was validated. Mm-hmm. And like, you know what I'm saying? And then I could be like, oh, they get me. They get it. Now I can hear what they're saying.
Which is
That's
why
all.
I wanted to do this with you so strongly, too, because I know that you helped me and you create this space with me.
But then, like, if people don't accept it after that, it's like, whatever. It's totally cool. Yeah. Like, you know, at least... Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to go after people and be like, and shake them by the shoulders and be like, you need to understand your power.
Wake up. Yeah.
No, but I personally believe in having a softer, gentler approach and just like, yeah, you are here. What you feel is totally real. Here's another way you could look at it. Or why don't we look at this together? Right.
Yeah. And you help to, and this is why I always give you so much appreciation. You help to expand that message, so to speak, from your experience and mine. And so if it was just me, and we talked about this in the first one, just speaking to the void, I would be so deep in what I was saying.
It would sound like revelation.
Yes. People, it would just...
You're like, what?
Yeah.
I like what you're saying, but I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, that feels good, but what? And you're absolutely right. And it creates this much bigger space and field for people to attract from. 100%.
Yes. And honestly, I feel like apart from knowing our power, we want to feel understood and accepted, like with others who are creating. And so I think both of those things are powerful. It's like, wow, somebody gets me. Like that's what a community is.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, oh, these people get me. And we're not of like any kind of community that's about victimhood or about staying where you are.
Right.
Right. But about empowering people from wherever they're starting. So I like looking at it that way.
And I will say one more thing, that I truly, and from what I've seen, know that this is a time of awakening collectively. And this is what I always say to anyone. Don't take anyone's word for anything. Just use it for what feels right. And
totally.
If you can meditate for an hour at a time, if you can get to that place, you will see the same truths that I or anyone else speaks about.
Yes. And I love that. I feel like it's so true. Like teachers who really are worth your time and energy keeping in your life are the ones that point back to you.
Yes.
And not to them and not to their products. Yeah. Like just go get my book and then read that. Like that point them to you first anyway.
Yes.
Like, I love that. That's worth anybody's time as a teacher like that.
And yes, I love that too. And that's where a lot of our overlap comes to as well, because most people don't do that. But the one thing that I do know is that in showing others that, and they show others that, and they show others that, that's the light of consciousness that truly spreads, that truly changes things. When you're not saying any formula or process or person, just go find it yourself, see the truth of it, and spread it from your own knowingness. That is the whole point. Then you can't stop that. You can't change that, which is why I say there is never anything going wrong. There is no darkness. There is no evil, because you cannot stop the light of consciousness. You can.
Right. Yeah. Like shadows are just like a shadow is just a blocking of light. It's not like a real thing.
Yes.
Like it's just something that's blocking the light.
Yes.
Just turn the light on there and it's gone.
Yeah. So just be the light, people. And find it. You got to find it within and then be it. So yeah, this is so
High five.
Yeah, high five. That's what I'm feeling. Yeah. Yeah, I love this. Well,
yes, I think this is a good place to stop this one.
Okay.
I feel like I could open up so many more things.
right. I know, me too.
And unless the energy is really different where we start next time, I would love next time to hear about your receiving experience and how that is for you. And then I mentioned something about like being attached to outcomes and
Right.
certain channels for things happening, because I know that has been a process for me.
Right.
And you've helped me with that too, that like letting go in quotes process.
And I love using your experiences either in the past or present as kind of a jumping off place at times.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it also helps people to relate to it, you know, and that's kind of why I've used some of my story even today, which I never do. And you've helped me.
Yes, thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And you've helped me in doing that because I haven't done that in years, you know, 7 or more years, because I just didn't want that to be something that was required for people to understand what I was saying. However, I have had a new understanding, especially in my interactions with you, in the usefulness of people having something to relate to, but in a different way. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate this dynamic that we can do that together with. So much appreciation. Once again, you're amazing. You are the perfect companion for this. And I have so much fun. So much fun.
This has been so much fun.
Yeah. So
spiritual, joyous conversation.
So spiritual, joyous conversation.
It's exactly what this was.
Yeah. Last time we didn't know where it was going to be, but I have created a simple website for now. It is the YouMeVersePodcast.com. We have created an Instagram. We have not posted to it yet, but I think we're going to start posting like show highlights to the stories. What's it called where you like keep a story on your page? What are those called? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Reels? The reels or the videos? Or?
You know how you can like you post a story, but then you like attach it to your page. You know what I'm talking about?
No, we'll talk about it. There'll be content though, for sure.
There's content on there. So, but that's also the YouMeVerse podcast on Instagram. And so, yeah, this is number 2, and we will do number 3 starting where Odette mentioned. Thank you again, everyone, so much. Thank you, Odette, so much. And I appreciate everything that we've created here.
Same, you too.
All right, talk to you guys soon. Bye.